Last December, all it took was a few gunshots to damage a key power station in Moore County and put 45,000 people in the dark. We don't know who did it, and there are limited ways to keep it from happening again. Welcome to the Daily Download. I'm Travis Fain, and today's deep dive conversation is about power grid security. We're joined by Cullen Browder, longtime investigative reporter here at WRAL, who did a piece on this topic this week. Cullen, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So there are thousands of these substations around the country, and the Moore County attack exposed how reliant we are on just, one or two of them. So what sort of upgrades are possible? What upgrades has Duke Energy done? They're by far the largest electricity provider in the state. What has been done since that attack?
It's an incomplete answer because it's security. Duke won't disclose everything that they're doing. They say, look, there are some things you'll see, some things you don't see. What we do know in terms of the two Moore County substations is they've added video monitoring. So they now have video surveillance. The primary substation there, West End, now has a perimeter fence. So if you're driving onto the property, there's now a perimeter fence, so you can't even see the substation from the road. So they've made those upgrades. And in terms of behind the scenes, they just say it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, but you know about the, let's call it hardening at these substations because you went to them, and tell everybody what happened after that.
Right. So we just wanted to see for ourselves what, if anything, had changed. So the first substation we went to, that West End substation, and we see this new perimeter fence, so you can't just drive right up to the substation anymore. We start getting some video, and again, we're outside the gate, so we're not trespassing.
Right, and you're wearing WRAL stuff. You're clearly a news crew. Yeah.
Correct. So within 10 minutes, sheriff's deputy pulls up on us and starts questioning us. What are you doing? And I'll be honest, too. In a sense, it was kind of reassuring.
Right.
And I don't know. I think he might have just been passing by, but I know that the patrols around that area have certainly increased since December 3rd when this happened. But within 10 minutes, he's on us, took our licenses, ran them through the system, reminded us, hey, you can't go by this fence, you can't trespass, which we understood. Then we went to the other substation in Carthage, which was shot up, and it is still very exposed. Chain link fence, you can see everything. It's right on the road.
There's just not a lot of room for a buffer, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. However, now they have a bank of cameras that are keeping track of anyone who comes onto the property or near the property. In fact, Duke Energy shared with us pictures of us when we rolled up and we're getting video of the site.
Yeah, and it's safe to assume, I'm guessing, that while those may have been the top priorities for security upgrades, they are not the only ones to get security upgrades around the state.
Right. And, in terms of, we've all driven by them, and it looks like you see everything. I mean, you see the wires, you see the metal boxes just pretty much behind a chain link fence, and that's how so many of these are designed. However, if you look at some of the newer ones, the fence is different. It's not just a typical chain link fence. It's mesh, steel. So that whole line of sight, take some pot shots, kinds of things, that is going to be a little more complicated. So clearly moving forward, because you've got thousands that they haven't changed, but moving forward, I think we're going to see a different configuration.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously you have to have line of sight to fire a gun, but it also seemed like in this attack, somebody knew what they were doing, kind of what they were shooting at. We'll talk a little bit more about that after the break, as well as how a power grid works, because I don't know that I know the answer to that question. So stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Daily Download. We're talking power grid security, particularly in light of an attack. Was it December, Cullen, in Moore County?
December 3rd, yes.
Somebody shot up a substation, two substations, and the power went out. So let me expose my ignorance a little bit here. When it comes to substations, why can't they just reroute around them? What makes any given piece of infrastructure key in this, the way we've got it set up?
It really depends on where you are and the type of high voltage lines that they have in any given area. So in a rural area, which Moore County pretty much is, it's limited in terms of the infrastructure that they have. So these substations are there to not only produce the electricity, but also distribute. So you've got a main line that's running basically just north of the area. And what we found talking to some engineering experts is just how critical really West End was, and to a degree the Carthage one as well, because there's a loop that essentially goes around Southern Pines and Pinehurst. And when they took out the West End and then the Carthage one, it controlled the entire loop. So these two substations essentially control that whole area. Now, in other areas, it's not going to be like that. If the same thing happened in Raleigh, you've got more substations spread out all over the place. So the ability to reroute power really depends on where you are. Now, this is something that Duke Energy is very attuned to, because they realize they're not going to be able to stop all these attacks or outages caused by weather. So one of their main priorities is figuring out, all right, if we lose a substation, how do we reroute power? And we need to make that a top priority.
And you spoke to a couple experts for this story, including at least one security expert who told you there's like a how-to guide circulating on the dark web. I mean, enabling. I don't think potential terrorists is too strong a word here.
No.
Because I mean, things get real serious when the power goes out. So I mean, there's a how-to guide on how to attack power stations out there.
Right. We interviewed an expert from I&E, and he actually has a colleague who specializes in the dark web, went on the dark web to look for information, and essentially you piece it together, but it's a how-to guide on how to disable power stations. And that's something that's obviously very concerning. The Department of Homeland Security just put out a bulletin within the past few weeks warning of this kind of information being distributed among extremist groups.
Yeah, and I mean, there's cybersecurity concerns too. There's obviously the concern with someone just taking some well-placed shots. It seems like there's only so much we can do, particularly given that electricity is already expensive. We're trying to update the grid and replace coal and deal with climate change. All this stuff, including new security, costs money. I mean, how far can we actually go here?
There's a limit. I mean, when you're talking about thousands of power stations, and we've all seen them, upgrading every single one, having armed guards or something like that, it's just not feasible. It's not going to happen. So I think the priority is going to be on those substations that are critical. In other words, some substations are more for distribution, but when you've got main power stations that could really cause huge problems, they're going to upgrade the physical security there. But again, that priority is going to be on sort of weeding out who are these extremist groups, what's this information circulating, how do we head them off, and then being able to reroute power once something does happen. And to be clear, obviously these attacks are incredibly serious, but compared to weather-related outages, they're incredibly rare.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, another part of the Duke grid went down, what was it, Christmas Eve, and a lot more people were out of power because it was too cold, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I mean, worth noting, the federal government takes this real serious. You get caught doing something like this, messing with the power grid or other utilities, and you could spend a good bit of your life in a federal penitentiary. They do not mess around on this, and that has been made clear. At this point, though, are they ever going to catch the shooter? I mean, how's the investigation going?
That's a great question. It's not going well. I mean, because here we are months removed, and
right,
they have
it's
not
April.
made any arrests. We've talked to the sheriff, who's frustrated, trying to get information. The information sharing process amongst law enforcement has been slow. So right now, they still haven't caught who's responsible. And if you remember, 8 10 years ago in California, there was a similar attack which sort of put this kind of attack on the radar, and they never caught the people who were responsible for that. So this is one of those that without actual camera surveillance and true intel information, it is hard to catch these kinds of people.
Yeah, and on the state level, because, I mean, this is largely, I think, going to be a federal issue going forward. But on the state level, there was a bill filed this legislative session to increase penalties for damaging a substation. That passed the state Senate unanimously earlier this year. It's sitting in the House, no action yet. In the House, Democrats have a separate bill that boosts penalties. It was introduced just last week. It's got a good bit of support, but it's paired with language. It creates a new cybersecurity fund to help state agencies, local governments deal with cybersecurity, which is a little bit different thing, not utilities. But there's also a new utility securitization trust fund to make security improvements on the power grid. Starts out, though, at $25 million in taxpayer money. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here is this is going to cost money.
It's going to cost a lot, and Duke Energy, as we all know, is asking for a significant rate increase, and they contend, look, this is all part of this. The ability to harden these sites, the ability to reroute power, make the system more resilient, that's all part of these upgrades, which is essentially going to cost us.
Yeah, I think the bottom line here on not just on security but electricity is that you should expect your electricity bill to go up fairly significantly in the next several years, not just because of security but because of climate change, because they're modernizing the grid in other ways. It's going to be an expensive time in the North Carolina power sector.
No question about it.
Colin, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
And thank you all for listening to the WRAL Daily Download, making us part of your morning routine. If you like what you're hearing, rate us, review us on Apple Podcast or whatever podcast app you happen to use. Another great way to get WRAL news in the morning is the Morning Briefing newsletter. Daily email waiting in your inbox every morning. Triangle news, events, headlines, gets you ready for your day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter. Thank you for your attention.